Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Development Management meeting. We'll start with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Leach, Councillor Mott, and Councillor Kimber is standing in for Councillor Mott. Thank you.
Very much. Declarations of interest. In accordance with the Code of Conduct, members are invited to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests, other registrable interests and non-registrable interests, including the nature and extent of such interests they may have in any items to be considered at this meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? Well, if it occurs to you as we go through, sing out at the time. Items requiring urgent attention, none to be brought to my notice. So we move on to item 4, which is the confirmation of the minutes. Can I ask if anyone's got any comments on the minutes? Councillor Mann.
Yes, Councillor Mott sent around some guidance in between our last meeting and now, one of which was about the local government organisations' guidance for planning and for planning committees. And in that, one of the things I noted was about where we've, in the last 2 meetings, we've had decisions where we've disagreed with the planning team. And in this case, it's very clear that, you know, the law says councils must give reasons for their decisions, and especially where we are disagreeing with the planning officers, we should be citing that. And what I noted in this minute, and actually I looked at the one last time as well, it's not really clear to me in the minutes how our objections to the planning team were noted. It's very descriptive, this minute, but I would have liked to see specifically, you know, we disagreed on this interpretation of this policy, because I think it would make it clearer to the public and to us as a committee why we've made a decision against the planners, because generally I would think we wouldn't want to. And so we need to be a bit more specific. And, you know, here, the very last line of that decision says the head of legal reminded members to have regard to the planning policies when making a decision, which makes it sound like we didn't, which I think is not true about what we were talking about last time. And I think it's not a really great way to end that minute when we then might in the future have to defend the decision. It really, to me, should end with something saying, you know, the committee decided to support the application because they disagreed with the planning decision on these 3 policies, or something like that, in a, you know, so that we know why we said no. This is more woolly than I would like to see.
I think I sort of agree with you there that I mean, nothing in the minutes is wrong in that sense, but it doesn't conclude with why we came to the decision that we came to. And I'll talk to Ms. Houselander, and we'll recraft those minutes. We'll bring them back at the next committee. I think that's a good point.
Chairman, when you say recraft the minutes, I'm interested to know what you mean by recraft.
Well, I think the minutes, whilst the minutes are accurate in that sense, what they don't do, as Councillor Mann has said, is they don't actually explain why we came to the decision we came to.
So are you saying that effectively the minutes are not a complete and accurate record of the minute of the meeting?
Yes, I think that's what I'm saying.
So you're going to defer confirmation of the minutes?
Yes. Yeah. We'll bring these minutes back at the next meeting and discuss that point then, if it needs to be discussed. I mean, maybe by then it'll be clear. We'll defer signing those and we'll bring them back at the next meeting. Right, that brings us on to planning applications, and we have 2 to consider today. And the first is 060423 full, land at Sierra X-ray 460975, Metherell Cross, Patchicot. I'll now turn to the planning officer for their report.
So it's Mr. Stewart who's
Yep,
on the
Mr.
line.
Stewart, who's online.
Good morning, members. Hopefully you can hear me adequately.
We can.
Great. Okay, let me just adjust. Right, this is an application for a temporary agricultural workers dwelling on land just to the south of Metherall Cross, opposite the turn-off to Patchcut, but lying immediately to the west of the main road. The area hatched red on the attached slide shows the site area, but doesn't give you a full picture of what is actually on the site, which is explained by this, I beg your pardon, by this aerial photograph. In 2020, an application for an agricultural building was approved by the council on this piece of land. I have to say that the building was shown to be sited much closer to the entrance, roughly with its main elevation facing the access, roughly along that line where my cursor is pointing to. What's actually happened is that the building has been set further back, and there's a silage clamp in front of the building, and then beyond that is the access onto the main road. There's been other applications relating to this site, the most recent being earlier this year, with the erection of a calf rearing building. It's shown attached to the southwest elevation of the building you saw on the aerial photograph, and the new building is outlined in red on this slide. The building is not yet constructed, but I'll come back to that in just a moment. Just to give you a picture of what the building may look like, the existing building is shown hatched on the left-hand side of the top drawing, with the proposed calf rearing building on the right-hand side, and that's the long elevation which faces southwest away from the road. It was accompanied by a landscaping scheme which shows a Devon hedge bank together with planting. That's simply an illustration. It's strategic. It doesn't give you the full picture of what is required to be provided. That's the subject of a condition relating to the permission for the calf rearing building. But usefully, it shows the relationship of the application that's now before you for a temporary workers dwelling, which is located in the southwest corner of the site, adjacent to the other agricultural buildings, both the one that's been built and the other one that's been approved. I should say that there is one further application that is currently with the council. It's a retrospective application for the siting of a food silo. You'll see that in one of the pictures later in the presentation. The only information we have about the size and appearance of the building is shown on these drawings. They're very basic. It shows a 3-bedroomed dwelling, single story, modular construction. We don't know what the materials are at the moment, but we assume that this has been submitted with a particular building in mind, and if members do eventually approve this application, then full details are required to be submitted as one of the conditions. It's approximately 121 square meters in size. Now, normally, agricultural dwellings have space for office. We assume, although we don't know, that it might be that one of the bedrooms is to be used as an office. Issues relating to this application are, well, the provision of a dwelling in the countryside is a major issue. Second element to that is there an agricultural need for the dwelling? And the third is, what is the landscape impact of the proposal? Now, just to give you an idea of what the building looks like, we're actually on the main road looking into the access, so into the top corner of the site. You can see the existing building set behind this silo, which is, as I said, the subject of a retrospective application. Half-rearing building will be on the far side of the existing building, and the dwelling, temporary dwelling, situated more or less where that pile of tyres is, but tucked round the back of the buildings that are already on site. It's pretty well hidden except for views directly as you pass the access, and immediately to the east of the site there's a fairly well established hedgerow which does mask the site from wider views, certainly from the east and from the main road. And if I go back to the overall plan here, the main area of concern in terms of landscape impact is from views from within the field to the south and to the west, hence the requirement for a very substantial landscaping screen across the back of this site, which I showed you earlier. Now, I should say that this is relating to a relatively small part of a large agricultural holding in the Chilcot area. Pieces of land which are owned by the applicant are shown in blue, and they amount to some 36 acres. They're provided in 3 parcels, one where the building is proposed and 2 others on the east side of the main road. The area that's shown in green is leased land. It's called Grasskeep. That's about 50 acres. And that relates to specifically the calf rearing activity for which this dwelling is required. However, the main land holding is some 202 hectares in size. The majority of that land is owned, about 150 hectares is owned, and most of the land is located at Lower Voden Farm, which is some distance to the south west of this site. In policy terms, we have problems relating to the sustainability of the site. It's set within the countryside. There are no facilities nearby, and certainly for a speculative dwelling, there are a number of development plan policies which are clearly contrary to this proposal, SP1, SPT2, and TTV1. Now, TTV 26, which is referred to in TTV 1, deals with development in the countryside. First part of the policy identifies a number of exceptional circumstances where dwellings may possibly be considered. One of those exceptions is directly relating to an agricultural need for a dwelling for workers to be present on site. This proposal meets that exceptional circumstance, and I'll come back to that in just a second. ETV 2624 also deals with the agricultural need, again, which this proposal complies with. So we're dealing here with an exceptional circumstance. I should highlight to members that this application is for a temporary period only. And the reason it's for a temporary period is that this is a relatively new part of the business for the existing farm enterprise. It relates specifically to the bringing on of about 100 calves per year, and they are to be brought on in this area. The building which is to house them has yet to be erected. As I said, it was only fairly recently approved earlier this year. I note that the applicants have already submitted a discharge of the landscaping condition relating to that permission. So they are intent on carrying the proposal forward. And my understanding is that as soon as that landscape condition is discharged, they will be pushing forward with the erection of the calf rearing building. So as a new business, whose viability is not yet proven, they are requesting a temporary permission, hence the mobile accommodation, and officers would, if members determine to grant permission, simply allow it for a period of 3 years. Now, this application has been sent to our agricultural consultant. He concludes that the proposal meets the functional tests, a requirement for an agricultural worker to be on site 24 hours a day. And he concludes that there is an proven agricultural need. And I think that's really where I'd like to leave the presentation. So if there are any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. If I may start, I have 2 questions. One is a comment you made about the lack of detail of the temporary buildings. Is it your experience that the detail of such buildings should be presented at the time of the application? I think what I'm saying is it usual that the material for these buildings are later stipulated in a condition? Perhaps you answer that one first, and I'll get on to my second one later.
Okay. I will say that it's slightly unusual, but I have to bear in mind that I think from the applicant's point of view, they may be looking at purchasing an existing building that is being used elsewhere. Now, the problem with this application is that they need to be sure that they're going to get an approval first. So they may have put in a bid for an existing building that's used elsewhere, but of course they can't be guaranteed of purchasing that building, which may account for the lack of detail. To bear that in mind, so it is unusual that we don't have more detail, but I'm satisfied that we can condition this application if members consider granting permission to get full details. What we do know is that it's single story, it's not a tall building, shallow pitched roofs. It gives us a reasonable idea of shape, massing and location, which is sufficient for us to condition the detailed design.
Okay, thanks very much. My second question is, You make the point that it's a temporary building because the viability of the business needs to be established before
Yes.
the applicant might consider putting an application in for a permanent building. Is, or do we in any way lay down what is required over the next 3 years in order for us to establish whether the business is viable or not? Or is that an open question to be proved or disproved at the time of the next application?
It's to be proven at the time of the next application. Basically, what the applicant would have to do if he were to submit an application for a permanent dwelling is demonstrate that the business is viable. Now, he has to demonstrate that in financial terms, so he will have to have full financial records of the business operation once it's up and running. It may be that it's not proven within 3 years. He may only have, for example, it may take him longer to erect the building. So in 3 years' time, we are either faced with one of three options, really. One, he removes the building as required by the condition. It's no longer required for agricultural purposes. In other words, the business is not a viable operation. The second is that he may seek to extend the term of the temporary permission to allow him a further year or maybe 2 years trading, and that will be a decision for members to take as to whether they grant permission for that further period. Or the third is that he has through at least 3 years worth of full operation in terms of financial details and can demonstrate that the business is viable. A detailed consideration of viability will obviously go to our agricultural consultant.
Okay, thanks very much. Other questions for the planning officer?
Chair.
Councillor Moody.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. What I'd like to know, and I think it'd be helpful for members, is to understand the difference between what is happening now with an agricultural worker working on that site, but not permanently, and how the new setup is going to require a full-time. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, if someone is travelling to that site to work, is it absolutely necessary that they are there full-time under the new development? So that's my first question.
Okay. The existing building is really for a mixture of housing some livestock, storage of fodder, storage of machinery. So what they've got at the moment on site is not a full-time operation that requires an agricultural worker on site. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the permission earlier this year for a calf rearing unit will allow that business to expand to looking after around 100 cattle per year to be brought on and then sold. Now, it's the determination of our agricultural consultant that that will need a full-time worker on site so that he's present to look after the livestock and deal with any emergencies as they arise, and that living however nearby he may live is not sufficient to provide full-time care. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I just have another question.
Yes.
In the conditions, now you said in your presentation that it's a temporary, and you referred to it as a mobile accommodation. Is it going to be sort of like porter cabin type construction, or is it going to be caravan? Well, it can't be caravans on that size. Can you just explain what you meant by mobile accommodation, temporary mobile accommodation?
It looks to me as though they're going to be looking at modular accommodation, porter cabins.
Okay, thank you very much.
In particular, yeah.
Okay. My final question is, in the conditions of approval, there's nothing to do, there's nothing specific about drainage for sewage and wastewater and things on that site. Are we adding that as a condition?
Yes, I ought to add a foul water condition. They had shown drainage, surface water drainage into a soakaway, which was acceptable for the other agricultural buildings on the site. But yes, foul drainage needs to be added, and I should have done that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the officer? Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Stewart, for a very informative and clear presentation. Just wanted to check one point, which I think I know the answer to, but nevertheless, just to make the point. It seems to me that this application, subject to the conditions that you've spoken about, hinges on TTV 26 and the agricultural workers dwelling being the nature of the proposal. And we have the agricultural appraisal that indicates a need. I note that the objections from both the parish councils specifically mentioned that it was not a milking herd and therefore no requirement for a 24-hour presence. And I just wanted to check, that is not an exclusive requirement, is it? It relates to animal husbandry, and it could therefore be for any type of animal husbandry, including the purpose for which this application is intended.
That's correct, yes. It is for animal husbandry. I think they're raising them for beef purposes. There's no dairy production involved, as far as I'm aware. Yes, I would understand, and I do understand the parish council's concerns relating to whether there is a need for a 24-hour presence on site with regard to the raising of beef cattle. But again, we've relied on our agricultural consultant for advice on this, and he is very clear that this operation meets the functional need.
Any other questions for the planning officer? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Stewart.
Thank you.
We have one registered speaker, that is Mr. Andrew Haywood. If you'd like to come up to the committee. I might just explain how this all works. You get 3 minutes to say what you want to the committee. The committee then have an opportunity to ask you questions. And your 3 minutes starts when you press the button.
Thank you. Good morning. I'll just start by sort of clarifying a few points and things that we've been through. In terms of sort of the cladding and things, it's proposed to be a sort of modular timber-clad building, just to reduce, obviously, the visual impact. So that's sort of, it's not mobile, it'll be sort of set on legs, but because it's a temporary building, obviously, potentially in 3 years, we could be told to remove it. It is beef production, and there's currently about 100 sort of store cattle which are being fattened on site, and then the new calf building is going to be 80 calves in that building at any one time, which in theory there'll be 4 lots of calves come through there. So you're talking of sort of over 300 calves going through that shed once it's up and running, which will be sort of within a month or so of the condition for the landscaping on that building being approved. Obviously, as has been explained, this is a satellite unit to the main farm, which is why there was actually an application beforehand which we withdrew for a permanent dwelling, and that one was withdrawn the main thing was that it wasn't supported by the agricultural consultant. He said there wasn't a need for a permanent dwelling at that moment in time, which is why we've resubmitted for a temporary permission, which then we hope in time, obviously, in 3 years, we'll have enough and it will be supported as a permanent dwelling. Obviously, we sit here today because of the parish councils and their continued vendetta against the applicant. There have been a number of complaints, which is the reason for a lot of the application things, particularly like grain silos and things, which is not usual to have an application for these type of things. But they've obviously, as we've seen, suggested that there isn't a need for the proposed dwelling. But as has been explained, the agricultural consultant has said that there is a need for this dwelling, and he believes that actually, even at the current moment in time, there is a need, even with the current building, there is sufficient need for a temporary dwelling on that site, and that he believes that because of the business plan which we have put forward to create a calf rearing unit in addition to the fattening unit, that there will be in 3 years a sufficient need for a permanent dwelling. Obviously that's subject to everything going to plan, which partly we are at the risk of the economics of agriculture, which sometimes don't necessarily in 3 years quite go how we plan, but the full intention is to get that building up as soon as is physically possible, and then to look for a 3 year, in 3 years, to apply for a permanent dwelling. And obviously, has been explained, yes, I saw in terms of the ward councillor's comments that residential development in an unsustainable rural area, but as has been explained, this is all part of the rural workers planning policy, and I think actually it's a fully justified temporary agricultural workers dwelling. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the applicant's agent? Councillor Kimber.
Thank you very much. So can I just clarify a couple of points? So I think you said there's a room for 100 calves in the building, and there'll be 300 calves a year going through. So can you just explain what what age you're buying the calves at, and presumably they're moved from the calf rearing unit into the store unit before they're moved on to Hatherley for selling?
Yeah, so the current building, yeah, that's sort of around 60 it will hold at any one time, and then the proposed one is going to hold 80 at any one time, which they're going to come into that one at 1 to 2 weeks of age. Then they'll be reared on milk for 6 weeks, then they'll be weaned and they'll be off milk for 6 weeks. And some of those will then be sold, others will be kept and, as you say, move into the building next door to be grown on. Others will be moved back to the main farm at Lower Voden. It will depend a bit. The ones which they see potential in growing, I suppose they'll be kept, what they deem to be the best, and then the others will be sold off. But part of that will come down to TV restrictions and where that sits.
Any other questions for the applicant's agent? Councillor Jury.
Thank you. I think we've established that the agricultural appraisal indicates a need for full-time work to be on site for animal husbandry purposes. I gather from the report that the intended occupants are a couple who are working on the one hand full-time and on the other hand working part-time at a local school and with young children, which seems to indicate that the business doesn't believe that a full-time agricultural worker is needed on site. So there just seems to be a bit of a dichotomy between those two positions. I wonder if you could explain how that's likely to work and the justification for having somebody living there full time.
Yeah, so that is the current situation, but under the standard mandate calculation within the agricultural appraisal, on the current numbers without the new card building, there is sufficient for it is 1.23 workers, and it is the applicant's intention once they've got this dwelling, and actually there obviously then they'll have the calf rearing on top of their current workload, so they will have to reduce work away from the holding, and actually the holding will become their main concern, because obviously in order to be able to push this forward and be able to get within the 3 years to the need for a permanent dwelling, there's a lot that needs to happen, and other areas aren't going to be able to be prioritised. But that all really hangs on, if this dwelling is approved, then the calf rearing building can come, and this element of the business can be pushed forward. So other elements of their life will have to reduce to allow that to happen. But at the minute, without a dwelling, it's very difficult to keep things moving, push this business forward.
So just to clarify, if and when the business is set up, if it becomes successful, the people living in this location will be spending much more of their time directly looking after those animals.
Yeah, that is correct, because obviously with calves, they will take a lot more looking after. They're a lot more susceptible to various animal health and welfare issues.
Any other questions for the agent? You've got one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Looking at the calf rearing unit, right, you say they've got calves moving in at 2 weeks old, being fed milk on till 6 weeks, yes? How often are they fed?
So calves are generally fed twice a day, once in the morning, once in sort of the mid-afternoon or so.
Any other questions? No, that's it. Thanks very much. So we've had questions from the officers, questions from the applicant. There are no further questions, so I will now move the recommendation.
No, Parish Council read out.
There's a, my mistake, there's a representation from the Parish Council which will be read by Mrs. Hall.
Thank you. This is from Beworthy Parish Council. The Council cannot see a reasonable reason for 24-hour supervision, and therefore for a dwelling at this site. This is not a milking herd, and of the proposed size of the dwelling. The agricultural appraisal states that there are no houses in the vicinity that are suitable. This is incorrect and ignores the fact that future occupants of the proposed dwelling already reside in Patchacott, only 3/4 of a mile away, which is approximately a 3-minute drive from the site, and both are already in non-agricultural full-time employment. The area of land at this site is less than 7 acres. The 36 acres mentioned in the application are in other areas of the parish. It is yet another blatant attempt at residential development in the open countryside in an unsustainable area with no amenities.
Thank you. My apologies for not remembering that you had something to read out. Right. Councillor Moody.
Is it possible to ask a question of the officer based on the information that we've had?
Yes, I see no reason why not, as long as the officer...
It's to do with material considerations, planning considerations. Could the officer...
Mr. Stewart's still there?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Stewart, I just wanted to, based on what we've been told, is the fact that we've heard that the proposed dwellers in the new proposal are not currently working on the farm, is that a material planning issue of who occupies the dwelling, or are we just looking at whether it is within our remit to approve or disapprove a dwelling? Is the occupant part of the consideration?
No, it's not really. Everything relating to this application relates to need. There is a need for an agricultural worker to live on site, as set out by our agricultural consultant. As for the occupant, it's really for the farm enterprise to determine who is a suitable person to actually reside on site. It could be a stockman brought in for the first 3 years until the business is established, for example. I know that you've heard slightly differently from the agent, but it's totally the need and not the occupation. The requirement of the condition requires that the occupier must work primarily in agriculture or last work in agriculture, and obviously their partners.
Thank you.
Right, I think we now have exhausted questions and statements, so I'll move the recommendation, which is for conditional approval. Can I have a seconder for that?
I'll second the move.
We're now in debate. Has anyone got anything they wish to say?
Right. I've looked at this application quite a lot, primarily based on the fact that the two parish councils are in complete agreement that it's development in the countryside that's not sustainable. There's a lot of things about the application that bothers me. For a full application, there's so much detail that's missing within the application. I've got a full list here, which I don't plan on going right the way through because some of it's already been covered. DEFRA's regulations on husbandry is twice a day for calves and for mature cattle. Right, so for somebody to be on site 24 hours a day, I personally can't see the need for it. As it's been stated, the applicant lives relatively close to it. It's not been defined who's actually going to occupy the building. If there's a desperate need for somebody there, I would assume that would be the worker that's going to be looking after the cattle and be there during the daytime as well as the nighttime. The lack of detail, which has been brought up already, which is the finish of the building. There is lack of information on the climate emergency compliance form. Sections M4, no details. M6, electric vehicle charging point is shown on, is said to be shown on the site plan. I can't find it. I'd be obliged if somebody would point that out to me. A5 lacks detail and A6 lacks detail. It's not filled in. The layout of the proposed building does not lend itself to thermal efficiency either. When you're looking at climate change, we've got to look at having well-insulated buildings, and the main bedroom is sort of just a small attachment to the rest of the building. It's not a thermally efficient building by the look of it. The other thing that I picked up on was the site levels. You know, I've driven past this site numerous times. In my opinion, only in my opinion, the bungalow, well, the domestic building will be downhill from the road. It will be a drop down. Although the site level states 0 on the road and 0 on 2 places on the proposed development. I would have liked to have seen the proper heights put in there from proper survey with GPS. Because that will have an effect on its visibility to the highway. And the last thing, because I'm fairly certain, I'm looking at it through the gateway, that the site gently slopes away from the current buildings. It's only a gentle slope, admittedly, but it looks like it gently slopes away. And it is then downhill of the agricultural establishments. Any runoff of effluent from that could potentially run towards the new development, which I don't think is very healthy. And the final thing I will mention, the lack of detail on drainage, particularly foul drainage. The surface water drainage, the details are so lax for a full application, and it's a thing I'm not happy about. But I'll leave that to the rest of us to discuss.
comments before we go to a vote. Councillor Kimber.
Sorry. You might not know, but I was a dairy farmer for a significant time, and I would say a calf and store rearing unit will definitely require more than 2 visits a day. The definite recommendation is for 2 visits a day, maybe a minimum, but caring well for 140 animals will take a lot more time than that, in my opinion. I hope this business will sustain a full-time worker, but I can accept the conversation about his second jobs. Most farmers I know have at least 2 jobs, or they're contracting. So I would hope this will be a successful agricultural business. And I think for me, I'll have to accept the findings of the report from the agricultural advisor. Thank you.
Any other points of discussion before we go to a vote?
If members, Councillor Southcott obviously raised a couple of issues which he was concerned about in terms of detail, if that is the members' conclusion, then I'm sure we could look to add some additional conditions, or alternatively defer the application determination until such time as we've received those details, just to let you know that that is an option for you if you were to decide that's how you wanted to go with the recommendation.
That poses an interesting question for me about whether we are here going to vote on whether we support the recommendation or not, or wish to defer it. I will go to the second one first. The members wish to defer this application until there is more detail. No? So that is a majority. So we will defer this application. Yes. So we'll defer it, subject to the details, many of which we've discussed, but just to be clear about the details, there's details on drainage, details on the construction of the materials of which the building is going to be constructed. You had a couple of other things, I think, about levels.
Yeah, precise level.
Is that it?
Yeah.
So drainage, levels, materials of the intended construction. Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, in deferring, are we accepting the principle set out in the agricultural appraisal that there is a need, and that therefore we're minded to think that this would meet the policy of TTV 26?
I think that, yeah, I mean, it's down to you effectively. So if you feel that you want to minded to approve the principle. Oh, sorry. If you're minded to grant the principle subject to the additional details, that is an option that you could pursue in terms of this application today. Obviously subject to the details being satisfactory when they are submitted.
Now, the question that raises is, it already says that various information needs to be provided as a condition of this application. And that would be for me, the Vice Chair and the Head of Planning to agree that those conditions have been met. If we added the conditions that we've spoken about this morning, which are drainage and levels, the type of construction is already in as a condition. We could then decide on whether we approve this application subject to those conditions being met satisfactorily. And that would be you putting your trust in the Chair and the Vice Chair and the Head of Planning to make sure that those conditions had been satisfactorily addressed. Councillor Mann.
Just listening to the business and the principle of TTV 26, I would prefer to do the latter because it seems to me we continually will be delaying, and by deferring the decision, we would be even further delayed. Whereas accepting the principle around the agricultural need, I just share Councillor Southcott's concerns around the drainage and the detail. So as long as that can still be taken care of, then I would be minded to support the overall application, subject to those things being correctly made clear.
I think that's the mood of the committee. So we'll now vote on whether we accept the recommendation, which is for conditional approval, subject to those conditions being satisfactorily addressed by myself, the Vice Chair and the Head of Planning. So those in favour of the officer's recommendation.
Sorry, could we just clarify that the conditions are on drainage, levels, construction and materials?
And the conditions that are
as well as
already
the
in
ones
the
on, yeah.
application.
So I just want to make sure that we've got the additional ones
we
clearly
have.
labelled. Yeah.
So those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please show. Those against? So that is approved, subject to the conditions being satisfactorily addressed. Okay, thank you for that. We now move on to the second application, which is (211023) Full Wooder Farm, Lewdown. The reason this is before us is that Councillor Mott, of course, is a member of this committee. She's absented herself from today's discussions because she is the applicant, quite rightly, but that's why it's in front of us. And the application is for a proposed roof over the replacement slurry store, resubmission of 162123. So I turn to the officer's report.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yeah, this is an application for a replacement roof over a replacement slurry store at Wooder Farm in Lewdown. This is a site located southeast of Lewdown, and it is accessed by an existing track to the northeast. This is the existing access track here, which then connects, it's a bit slow, sorry, connects up to this road, and then you can come down through Lew Trenchard. The farm is existing 56 hectares. It has rising and falling topography. There are limited public views of the site. There is an existing public right-of-way to the southwest corner, this here, which connects down towards the plantation in the southeast. So the proposal is to replace the existing slurry store, so where this hatched area is. It will be concrete walls with freeboarding, cement roof sheeting. It will measure 36.8 metres in length, 12.4 metres in width, and 5.6 metres in height. And the slurry is located northwest of the site in amongst the existing farm buildings. So this is a location plan, just to show you a different plan of the application. And then this is the proposed block plan. Apologies, it's not zoomed in. So the area around the building, we have a planting, which has been discussed by the landscaping officer and is proposed to be subject to condition to be planted in the first available season. So all the species has been previously discussed, and it includes a 63-metre Devon bank hedge along the sides of the building. Some proposed elevations here. It's typical in agricultural modern design with gable ends, timber fenestration, and then concrete sheet roof, fibre cement sheet roof. And then the floor plan, it's just replacement slurry store in the middle with a ramp. Some photographs. So this is looking at the site from the southwest. You can towards the farmstead. So I've just dropped a red arrow there. So the proposed location is behind this building. This is a photograph of the existing slurry area. Here, showing the building on the left. And then this is the area which we are proposing planting along along the side, just to help with some landscape screening. And then this is an elevated photograph from the main dwelling house looking out towards the rear of the building. So the key issues are the required agricultural need under TTV 26 and Dev 15. The application is in response to the Clean Air Strategy, which requires all digestive stores to be covered by 2027. The design is modern in agricultural appearance and is sited in amongst the existing farmstead. The proposed planting and drainage will be secured by proposed conditions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Questions for the planning officer? Goodness, have we nothing to say about a slurry? Okay, no questions. Councillor Kemper. Thank goodness.
I'm not sure it's relevant, but is there any, what's the storage capacity, do we know? I don't mean in litres, I mean in, like, does it hold the slurry for the whole winter? But I don't think it's relevant to the application. I'm just interested.
No, we've not had that information.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I'll move the recommendation, which is for conditional approval. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. Discussion? Anyone wish to raise any points of discussion on the slurry store? Councillor Jury.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation, very helpful in putting everything into context. Seems to me that this clearly is a development that meets an essential need of agriculture in this location, and I will be supporting it. Any other discussion points before we go to the vote? Okay, those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please show. Unanimous, I think. Thank you. So that is approved, subject to the conditions on time, plans, planting and drainage being satisfactorily agreed by the planning team. Okay, that concludes the planning applications. We now have possible discussion on planning appeals update.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's just one appeal decision since the last meeting. It's in relation to a tree preservation order tree in Castle Road in Oakhampton. The application was refused because of the potential impact on the character and appearance of the area, and also on the value of the tree to the area. The inspector disagreed with the officer's recommendation and felt that the nature of the tree as existing, whilst it would be slightly smaller as a result of a 0.5 height reduction, he felt that there were a substantial number of trees within the area, and he didn't feel that it would be something which he could say would have any substantial harm. He thought the harm was very limited, and felt that the tree would continue to contribute towards the character and appearance of this area of the town. So he upheld the appeal. So effectively, if you like, as a planning authority, we lost the appeal, and that's it from an appeals perspective this time.
I have to say we couldn't see them. What I didn't have. Right, item 7 on the agenda, update on undetermined major applications. I've just got one, the very first one. I note the applicant dates back to December 2019, which must make it one of our vintage applications. I mean, are we getting anywhere with it?
So just in terms of the history to this site, it is an old application. It's been dealt with by a number of officers over the years. The current, that is currently being dealt with by Stephen Stroud. We were looking to see if we could refuse it effectively probably a couple of years ago, but the applicant there's a listed building on the site, and the applicant's very keen to do something with that listed building, and as a result we have extended and extended and extended. However, over recent times we've there's been a flood objection from the lead local flood authority, and also there's some question because there's a listed building and some housing proposed in order to sort of provide for the repairs that are needed to the listed building. There's always been a conclusion that the viability of the scheme is there is no viability unless they can't provide affordable housing. So our recent affordable housing officer has now said she thinks there is a potential for affordable housing. The applicant can't provide it in his mind. So the intention is for us to try to see if we can agree on a refusal with the applicant, because it's been in such a long time. We're doing this in a and by agreement, just so that we can make a decision. Alternatively, he could withdraw it and resubmit. I think there's a slight lack of professional support for the applicant. And if he were to have a little bit more professional support, then that might make the application more determinable in terms of approving. But at this stage, it's still not acceptable, and we don't see a way of it becoming acceptable.
Are you planning to have that meeting with him relatively soon? So we might have an update.
Yes.
The next planning meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else got any anything they wish to raise on the undetermined major applications? No? Okay. That concludes the business today. Thank you very much indeed. Like I say, we're